I discovered my HOA was illegally using my family farm as their parking lot, but they had no idea I controlled the power line feeding their entire community. What would you do if you found out your annoying neighbors depended on your land to keep their lights on? Comment below where you're watching from. I never thought I'd go to war with my neighbors. But that's exactly what happened when I woke up to find strangers parking on my farm. The sound of engines and slamming. Car doors jolted me awake at 7 a.m. on what should have been a peaceful Saturday morning. My grandfather's farmhouse has stood on this land for over 70 years, long before fancy houses sprouted up around it. I inherited this 10-acre farm 3 years ago when Grandpa passed away. It's not just land to me, it's my history, my future, and my everyday happiness. I grabbed my robe and rushed outside, still in my pajamas. What I saw made my blood boil. At least 12 cars were already parked in neat rows across my east field, the same field where I was planning to plant corn next week. A woman in a blue blazer and perfect hair was waving more cars onto my property. Like she owned the place. She had a clipboard and that fake smile some people wear when they think they're in charge. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" I shouted, jogging across my yard, my old farm dog Rusty barking beside me. The woman turned, looking annoyed at the interruption. "Good morning," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Margaret Wilson, president of the Evergreen Meadows Homeowners Association." "I don't care if you're the president of the United States," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is private property, my property, and you're trespassing." Margaret tilted her head like I was a child who didn't understand basic facts. "Oh, you must be confused. This area was designated as community overflow parking in our HOA bylaws." She glanced at her clipboard. "Are you the Davis who lives in the old farmhouse? We've been trying to contact you about joining our association." "Not confused at all. I've never signed any HOA agreement," I replied, pulling out my phone to show her my property deed. "This land has been in my family for generations. We're not part of your development." Margaret's perfect smile wavered. "Well, this has been designated community parking for years. The previous board must have had an arrangement with your grandfather." "My grandfather would never allow this," I said firmly. "He taught me to value every inch of this soil." Other neighbors were gathering now, watching us argue. Some looked embarrassed, others annoyed at the holdup. One man in golf clothes called out, "Hurry up! We'll be late for the tournament." Then I noticed something that made me forget about the parking situation entirely. A large truck was backing up toward my backfield, straight toward the tomato plants I'd spent weeks nurturing. "Stop that truck right now!" I shouted, breaking into a run. "You're destroying my crops!" The driver, seeing me running and waving, hit the brakes just inches from my carefully tended rows. He rolled down his window. "Lady at the entrance told me to park big vehicles back here." I whirled around to find Margaret right behind me, her face flushed with anger. "Mr. Davis, you're making a scene. We have a community golf tournament today, and this is the designated overflow area." "Says who?" I demanded. "Show me one document with my signature on it." "Our community bylaws clearly state—" "I'm not part of your community," I interrupted. "And you have exactly 1 hour to get these vehicles off my property before I call the sheriff and have them all towed at the owner's expense." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You wouldn't dare." I pulled out my phone. "Try me." She grabbed my wrist. "Listen to me carefully. Evergreen Meadows is home to the mayor, 2 city council members, and Judge Reynolds. Who do you think the sheriff will side with? A bunch of respected community leaders or one stubborn farmer?" I jerked my arm away. "Take your hands off me. This is assault now on top of trespassing." A few neighbors had wandered close enough to hear our argument. An older gentleman stepped forward. "Margaret, maybe we should just move the cars. If this is really his property—" "It's HOA property now," Margaret snapped. "And you can all thank Mr. Davis here when you're late for tea time." As if on cue, a shiny black SUV pulled up, and a stern-looking man in an expensive suit stepped out. He walked straight to Margaret, completely ignoring me. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Margaret smiled, suddenly looking relieved. "Perfect timing, Jeffrey. Our friend here seems confused about the parking arrangement." Jeffrey turned to me, extending his hand. "Jeffrey Williams, HOA attorney." "And you are?" "The legal owner of the property you're all trespassing on," I replied, not taking his hand. His smile didn't falter. "I understand your confusion. The easement agreement that allows for community parking on this portion of land was established years ago. I have copies back at my office." "An easement I never signed," I insisted. "Show me the paperwork right now. We can discuss this civilly," Jeffrey said smoothly. "Perhaps over coffee? There's no need for threats." I looked around at my invaded farm. Cars on my growing fields. Entitled people staring at me like I was the problem. Something in me snapped. "You have 1 hour," I repeated. "Then I'm calling the sheriff, the local news, and every towing company in the county." I turned and walked back to my house, ignoring Margaret's threats behind me. Inside, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely dial my phone. "County Records Office," a friendly voice answered. "This is Alex Davis at the old Miller farm outside Evergreen Meadows. I need to check if there are any easements or agreements attached to my property." "It's urgent. We close at noon today," the voice replied. "Can you come right now?" I glanced at my watch. 9:15 a.m. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. As I grabbed my keys, I looked out the window. Instead of moving cars, more were arriving. Margaret was directing a pickup truck to park right up against my tomato plants. I saw her look toward my house with a smirk on her face. This wasn't just about parking anymore. This was war. The county records office was quiet on Saturday morning, with only 2 employees working the weekend shift. The older gentleman at the desk looked up as I burst through the doors. "I'm Alex Davis. I called about property records for the Miller farm." He nodded, holding out his hand. "Frank Jenkins. Been working here 30 years. I knew your grandfather." This caught me by surprise. "You did?" "Old man Miller was quite a character," Frank said with a smile. "Smart as a whip, especially when it came to protecting what was his." Frank led me to a small research room filled with filing cabinets and computers. "Your property has an interesting history. The developers who built Evergreen Meadows tried to buy your grandfather's land for years. He always refused to sell," I said proudly. "That he did," Frank agreed. "Drove them crazy. They even tried to have the land condemned at one point, claiming it was a public nuisance." My stomach tightened. "That sounds familiar." Frank pulled several thick folders from a cabinet. "Let's see what we've got here. Property deeds, tax records, building permits." He spread the documents on the table, putting on reading glasses. After 20 minutes of searching, Frank sat back. "Just as I thought. There's no easement for parking or public access on your property. Not a single document showing your grandfather ever agreed to let the HOA use his land." Relief washed over me. "So they're definitely trespassing." "Without a doubt," Frank confirmed. "But there is something interesting here." He pulled out a yellowed document. "Your grandfather granted the power company an easement 30 years ago to run electrical infrastructure through the north corner of your property." I leaned forward. "What does that mean exactly?" Frank showed me a faded map. "According to this, the main transformer supplying power to Evergreen Meadows is located on your land. Your grandfather negotiated this. When the development was first built, the power company pays you $500 annually for access." I stared at him. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" Frank's eyes twinkled. "The HOA community's electricity runs through your property. Legally, you control access to that transformer." "Can they move it?" I asked. "Not easily," Frank replied. "It would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars and require county approval, new permits, and probably a long service interruption. Plus, your permission to terminate the current easement." My mind was racing. "What about those payments?" "I've never received any money from the power company." Frank typed something into his computer. "Payments have been going to a trust account in your grandfather's name. Since his passing, they've been accumulating. You should contact Pinewood Electric about updating the payment information." I left the records office with copies of everything, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and excitement. On the drive home, I called Pinewood Electric's emergency line. "This is Alex Davis. I own the property where transformer station E245 is located. I need to speak with someone immediately about unauthorized access to this equipment." After being transferred twice, I finally reached the operations manager. "Mr. Davis, I'm Ron Fletcher. What seems to be the problem?" "Someone from Evergreen Meadows HOA is claiming rights to my property," I explained. "I'm concerned about unauthorized access to the transformer station." "That's a serious safety issue," Ron said. "That station serves over 200 homes in that development. Only authorized personnel should be anywhere near it." "Exactly my concern," I replied. "I'll be installing security cameras today and would like to confirm who has legitimate access." "Only Pinewood Electric technicians with proper ID," Ron assured me. "I can email you the maintenance schedule, so you're aware when our people will be on site." Perfect. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had a plan. To my surprise, most of the cars were gone from my field. Only 3 remained, along with deep tire tracks and crushed plants. I surveyed the damage to my tomato field, taking photos with my phone. Several plants were completely flattened, representing weeks of work and future income destroyed. Inside my house, I printed the documents from the county office and organized them in a folder. Then I found the old property surveys my grandfather had kept, showing exact boundaries and landmarks. Just as I finished, a knock came at my door. Margaret stood there with Jeffrey Williams, the HOA attorney. 2 other people stood behind them, a middle-aged man with a stern expression and a young woman holding a clipboard. "Mr. Davis," Margaret began, her tone falsely pleasant. "We've brought the parking agreement for you to sign." "Just a formality, really?" I stared at her for a long moment. No cars on my property by the end of the day, and I expect payment for the damage to my crops. Jeffrey stepped forward. That's not how this works. The HOA board has already voted to designate this area for community use. We're simply asking for your cooperation. And if I don't cooperate? The stern-looking man spoke up. I'm Robert Thompson, city councilman. This community represents significant tax revenue for our city. Surely we can reach a reasonable arrangement that benefits everyone. The young woman with the clipboard looked uncomfortable. The environmental impact study for additional parking within Evergreen Meadows would take months. This is really the only viable option for community events. I smiled, which seemed to unnerve them. I've just come from the county records office, I said, holding up my folder. There is no easement for parking on my property. Never has been. Margaret waved her hand dismissively. Old paperwork can be updated. I've also discovered something interesting about your community's power supply, I continued, showing them the easement documents. The transformer serving your entire neighborhood? It's on my land. Their faces changed instantly. Margaret's smile disappeared. Jeffrey straightened his tie. The councilman took a small step backward. I'm officially revoking access for non-essential maintenance until we resolve this situation, I announced. I've already spoken with Pinewood Electric about unauthorized personnel near their equipment. You can't do that, Margaret sputtered. People have medical equipment, refrigerators. I'm not cutting your power, I clarified. I'm just exercising my property rights, the same way you're trying to exercise yours over my farm. The councilman cleared his throat. Let's not be hasty. I'm sure we can work something out. I agree, I said calmly. Here's my proposal. All vehicles off. My property by 5 p.m. Full compensation for crop damage. And a signed acknowledgement that my land is not HOA property. Or what? Margaret challenged, though her voice had lost its edge. I held up the power easement document. Or I exercise my right to deny access for scheduled maintenance next week. Hot summer coming up. Would be a shame if the system couldn't handle the load because it couldn't be properly serviced. They left in a hurry, huddled together in urgent conversation as they walked to their cars. I watched from my window as they drove away, feeling both victorious and uneasy. This wasn't over. People like Margaret didn't give up easily. My phone rang. It was Ron from Pinewood Electric. Mr. Davis? I've been told there might be an access issue with transformer. E245, is everything okay? I took a deep breath. There's been a misunderstanding with the local HOA. They seem to think they have rights to my property. That's concerning, Ron replied. That transformer is critical infrastructure. Any access issues could affect service reliability for hundreds of homes. I understand, I said. I don't want anyone to lose power. I just need the HOA to respect my property rights. Tell you what, Ron offered. I can come out Monday morning to inspect the transformer and discuss optimal access arrangements. Sometimes a little official presence helps clear things up. I thanked him and hung up, feeling slightly more optimistic. But my relief was short-lived. Through my window, I spotted Margaret's car returning, followed by 3 police cruisers with lights flashing. This fight was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. I stared at Margaret and her lawyer, standing on my porch with that parking agreement in hand. Their smug faces made my blood boil, but I kept my voice steady. I'm not signing anything, I said firmly. In fact, I'm giving you 24 hours to remove all vehicles from my property and repair any damage to my fields. Jeffrey's expensive suit rustled as he leaned forward. That's not how this works. The HOA board has already voted, and I've just discovered something interesting about your community's power supply. I interrupted, pulling out the easement documents from the folder in my hands. The transformer serving your neighborhood? It's on my land. Their faces changed so fast it was almost funny. Margaret's smile vanished. Jeffrey's confident posture crumbled. That's impossible, Margaret whispered, grabbing the papers from my hands. Check for yourself. My grandfather negotiated this deal years ago. The power company pays me every year for access to that transformer, the one that supplies electricity to every single house in Evergreen Meadows. Jeffrey adjusted his tie nervously. This doesn't change anything about the parking situation. Actually, it changes everything. I'm officially revoking access for non-essential maintenance until we resolve this parking situation, I continued. I've already left a message with the power company explaining the situation. You can't do that, Margaret sputtered, her face turning red. People have medical equipment, children, elderly residents. I'm not cutting your power, I clarified, taking back my documents. I'm just exercising my property rights, the same way you're trying to exercise yours over my farm. Interesting how that works, isn't it? Margaret's phone was in her hand before they even reached their car. I could hear her yelling at someone as they drove away. Within 30 minutes, my phone started ringing with calls from various HOA board members. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I called the power company myself and spoke with their legal department, confirming my rights under the easement agreement. They agreed to notify me before any non-emergency work was done on the transformer. By dinner time, cars started disappearing from my field. I watched from my kitchen window as drivers rushed to move their vehicles, some casting worried glances at my house. By nightfall, my property was empty. The next morning, I woke up early to inspect the damage. Tire tracks had ruined parts of my east field, crushing young plants and compacting soil I'd spent months preparing. I took detailed photos and videos, documenting everything. As I finished, I spotted Elena, my friendly neighbor from Evergreen Meadows, walking along the fence line with her dog. "Morning," she called out. "Emergency HOA meeting last night. Never seen Margaret so angry." I walked over to chat. "What happened?" "She tried to convince everyone you were threatening to cut off our power. But old Mr. Henderson, he used to be a lawyer, pointed out that if the transformer really is on your land, and we've been using your property as a parking lot without permission, we could be in serious legal trouble." Elena lowered her voice. "Half the board wanted to back down immediately. And the other half? Margaret convinced them you're bluffing. She said no one would risk the bad publicity of appearing to threaten a community's power supply." Elena looked uncomfortable. "Just be careful, okay?" She mentioned something about other ways to handle problem neighbors. I thanked Elena for the warning, and spent the rest of the morning calling fencing companies to repair the sections that had been damaged by cars. The earliest appointment I could get was 2 weeks away. That afternoon, while reviewing repair estimates, I heard the mail truck. Walking out to my mailbox, I found a certified letter with the Evergreen Meadows HOA logo. Inside was a formal notice informing me that I was being fined $5,000 for unauthorized landscape modifications and agricultural activities contrary to community aesthetic standards. The letter also stated that I had 72 hours to remove all farming equipment visible from community roadways and cease all commercial agricultural activities, or face additional fines of $500 per day. At the bottom was Margaret's signature, with a handwritten note. "Perhaps now you'll reconsider our generous parking agreement." I read the letter 3 times, my hands shaking with anger. Then I noticed something strange. The letterhead listed my property address as being part of Evergreen Meadows. I called Frank at the county records office. "They can't fine you if you're not a member," he confirmed after hearing my story. "But be careful. I've seen HOAs like this before. They'll try to wear you down." What should I do? Document everything. Get security cameras. And maybe talk to Oliver Jenkins. He's an attorney who specializes in fighting overreaching HOAs. Handled a similar case last year in Pine Creek. I thanked him and immediately ordered security cameras online. While checking out, I noticed an email notification. The power company had just deposited this year's easement payment into my account. An idea began forming in my mind. I looked up Oliver Jenkins' number and left a message explaining my situation. Then I walked out to look at the transformer on my property. The small green box I'd barely noticed before that suddenly seemed so important. As I approached it, I spotted fresh footprints in the mud surrounding it. Someone had been here recently. The access panel looked slightly ajar. "That's him!" she shouted, pointing at me standing near the transformer. "He was just tampering with it." I stood frozen beside my transformer, watching Margaret point her finger at me while yelling to the power company worker. My heart pounded in my chest. She was trying to frame me. "I just got here," I said calmly to the worker. The panel was already open. "Look at the security cameras in my barn if you don't believe me." The worker, his name tag read Dave, looked confused. "Ma'am, we don't have any reports of tampering." "Check it," Margaret demanded. "He threatened to cut our power yesterday." Dave approached the transformer cautiously and examined the panel. "This has definitely been tampered with. The access lock is broken." He turned to me with suspicion. "Sir, did you do this?" "Absolutely not," I replied. "I just noticed it myself and was about to call it in. My security cameras will show. I've been in my house all morning until 5 minutes ago." "Convenient that you mention cameras," Margaret sneered. "Where are they?" "I don't see any. They're being installed tomorrow," I admitted. But I had nothing to do with this. In fact, I paused, a realization hitting me. "Dave, when was the last time an official power company employee checked this transformer?" "According to our records, not for at least 3 months," Dave said, checking his tablet. I turned to Margaret. "How did you know the panel was open? You drove straight here and pointed it out." Her face flushed. I noticed it earlier when you were trespassing on my property." I finished for her. "Or when someone you sent was breaking the lock." Dave looked between us, clearly uncomfortable. "I'm going to need to file a report about this." "Please do," I said. "And I'd like a copy, along with confirmation that no one from Evergreen Meadows has authorization to access this equipment." Margaret stormed back to her SUV without another word. Dave spent 30 minutes securing the transformer and taking photos. He gave me his card and promised to have his supervisor call me. That night, Oliver Jenkins returned my call. After hearing my story, he agreed to represent me. Classic HOA overreach, he said. They target properties they want to control, especially ones that don't fit their aesthetic vision. The good news is, you've got leverage with the transformer easement. A week passed without incident. I filed formal complaints about the trespassing and tampering, installed security cameras, and began working with Oliver to draft a cease and desist letter to the HOA. Then, early Monday morning, my alarm system woke me at 4:30 a.m. The security app on my phone showed movement at my east fence. I rubbed my eyes in disbelief at what I was seeing. Someone was cutting through my newly repaired fence with bolt cutters. I called the sheriff immediately and rushed outside with my phone recording video. By the time I reached the fence, 3 sections had been cut open, and a line of cars was already pulling into my field. "This is private property," I shouted, continuing to record. "You're trespassing!" A woman in the first car rolled down her window. "We have permission from the HOA. Check your email if you don't believe me." One by one, each driver showed me the same email from Margaret, authorizing them to park in the community overflow lot on my property. The email claimed the dispute had been officially resolved. When Sheriff Reynolds arrived 20 minutes later, 12 cars were already parked on my land. He looked uncomfortable as I showed him the cut fence in my videos. "I'm sorry, but there's not much I can do right now," he explained after speaking with several drivers. "The HOA has submitted documents to the county showing this area is designated community parking." "What documents?" "Those are forgeries," I protested, showing him my property deed on my phone. "Look," he sighed, "this is becoming a civil matter. You've got conflicting claims and paperwork. Take it up in court. I can't just tow all these people's cars, based on your word against the HOAs." After he left, I called Oliver, who promised to file for an emergency injunction that day. But the courts moved slowly, and meanwhile, more cars kept coming. Fuming, I walked to Elena's house. She had always been straight with me. She invited me in for coffee, her face showing concern. "I need to show you something," she said, once we were seated at her kitchen table. She pulled out her tablet. "I'm on the HOA email list. What they're doing isn't right." She opened her email and showed me a series of messages between Margaret, Jeffrey, and other board members. They discussed strategies for annexing the farm eyesore and forcing compliance through escalating pressure. "Keep scrolling," Elena said grimly. The next email contained something that made my stomach drop, a scanned document with what appeared to be my grandfather's signature on an HOA agreement from 15 years ago. "That's fake," I whispered. "My grandfather would never have signed this." "I know," Elena replied. "Look at the date, April 2009. Your grandfather was still the owner?" "Yes, until he passed away 3 years ago. But that's not his signature. I've seen enough of his documents to know." Elena nodded. "I thought so. Margaret's husband works at a printing company. He has access to equipment that could easily produce this." She scrolled to another email, this one from yesterday. "It gets worse. They're holding an emergency board meeting tonight at Sevengor's special guest, Margaret's cousin, who works for the power company. They're discussing options to permanently resolve the transformer issue." "What does that mean?" I asked, though I feared I already knew. "They're planning to reroute the electricity to bypass your property entirely. Her cousin says it's expensive but doable. Once that happens, you lose your leverage." I sat back, stunned by how far they were willing to go. "Why are you showing me this? Won't you get in trouble?" Elena sighed. "I bought my house here because it backed up to your farm. I loved seeing the open fields, the crops, not another cookie-cutter house. They've been trying to force out anything that doesn't fit their perfect community vision for years." My phone buzzed with a text from Oliver. "Judge Henderson granted our emergency hearing. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Bring all documentation." I showed Elena the message. "Will you testify about these emails if needed?" She hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Yes, this has gone too far." As I walked home, I noticed a power company truck parked near my property line. Margaret's cousin was already getting to work. I had less than 24 hours to stop them. Back at my house, I gathered every document I had. Property deeds, easement agreements, photos of the damage, security videos, everything. Then I made one more call to the local news station. "I have a story about HOA corruption, forged documents, and property rights," I told the reporter. "And it all comes to a head at a public meeting tonight." My heart pounded as I stood outside the packed community center. Through the window, I could see Margaret waving her hands excitedly, pointing at huge photos of my farm now marked with parking spaces and walkways. People nodded along, completely fooled by her lies. I clutched my folder of evidence, took a deep breath, and pushed open the door. The room went quiet as I walked in. Margaret froze mid-sentence, her mouth hanging open like a fish. "Well, look who decided to join us," she said, regaining her composure. "We were just discussing the community improvements planned for that eyesore you call a farm." Several people laughed. I felt my face burn but kept walking straight to the front of the room. "Actually, I'm glad you're all here," I said loudly. "There's something you all deserve to know about what your HOA leadership has been doing with your money and your trust." Margaret rushed toward me. "He's trespassing!" "Someone call security." An older man in the front row stood up. "Let him speak, Margaret. I want to hear what he has to say." Others nodded in agreement. I could see Margaret's perfect smile cracking at the edges. "Fine, you have 2 minutes," she snapped. I connected my laptop to their projector while saying, "I think you'll want to give me more than 2 minutes once you see this." The first slide appeared. A copy of my property. Deed and survey map showing clear boundaries. Whispers spread through the crowd. "As you can see, my farm has never been part of Evergreen Meadows. I've never signed any HOA agreement." I clicked to the next slide. The forged document with my grandfather's signature that Elena had discovered. "This is a forgery your board created. My grandfather passed away 3 years ago. But this document is dated just 6 months ago." The room erupted. Margaret lunged for my laptop, but I moved it away just in time. "He's making this up," she shouted, her face turning bright red. "This troublemaker has been breaking our rules since he moved in." I calmly clicked to the next slide. The emails between Margaret and Jeffrey discussing how to force compliance through escalating pressure and make his life miserable until he gives in. "These are your HOA emails discussing the plan to harass me off my property," I explained. "And this one shows Margaret authorizing 30,000 of your dues for legal consultations about taking my land." An angry buzz filled the room. People were standing now, pointing at Margaret and the board members seated at the front table. "Where did you get those?" Jeffrey demanded, his lawyer face suddenly looking worried. "That's not important," I replied. "What's important is that your leadership has been lying to you." A woman stood up near the back. "My husband and I paid a $500 fine last month for having a vegetable garden that was too visible from the street. Meanwhile, you're spending our money on this?" Others joined in with similar stories. The room grew louder with each passing second. Margaret grabbed the microphone. "Everyone calm down. This is a complicated legal matter that you don't understand. We're acting in the community's best interest." I clicked to my final slide, the county records showing the electrical easement. "One last thing you should know," I said, raising my voice above the noise. "The main transformer that powers your entire community sits on my property. Your homes get electricity because my grandfather allowed the power company to place equipment on our land." The room went completely silent. "Is that true?" someone finally asked. "Absolutely," I replied. "I've confirmed it with the county records office and the power company. I have no desire to interfere with your electricity. I just want to be left alone to run my farm in peace." Thomas, a gray-haired man I recognized as living on the edge of the development, stood up. "I've had enough of this." "Margaret, is any of this true? Have you been lying to us?" Margaret's face twisted with rage. "This meeting is over. Everyone needs to leave immediately." "Not until we get answers," shouted Elena from the back of the room. Jeffrey leaned over and whispered something in Margaret's ear. She pushed him away. "I don't care about legal consequences," she shrieked, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I've worked too hard to let some dirt farmer ruin everything." The crowd gasped. Margaret realized her mistake too late. "What I meant was," she started, but people were already shouting questions. "Have you been targeting other homeowners too? What else have you been spending our money on? Did you really forge documents?" Margaret grabbed her purse and headed for the side door. "This meeting is adjourned. The board will issue a statement tomorrow." Thomas blocked her path. "No, Margaret. I think we need a vote right now. All in favor of suspending the current board pending an investigation? Raise your hands." Almost every hand in the room shot up. Margaret's face went from red to purple. "You can't do this. It's against the bylaws." "Actually," I said quietly, "your bylaws allow for emergency, removal of board, members in cases of suspected financial impropriety. Section 8, paragraph 4. Margaret stared at me with pure hatred. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She dialed a number and spoke into it while staring directly at me. "Do it now," she said clearly. "All of it." 3 seconds later, the lights went out. Emergency lights flickered on, casting eerie shadows across the shocked faces. Margaret's laugh cut through the darkness. "See what happens when you challenge me? Your precious farm controls our electricity? Let's see how you like it when—" Her voice was cut off by the sound of sirens approaching in the distance. Screams filled the dark room. My phone lit up, the power company calling. "Hello? Yes, I'm at the HOA meeting right now," I answered loudly. Everyone went quiet. I put it on speaker. Mr. Davis, we caught someone messing with your transformer. A woman in a blazer. Our cameras got everything. Police are on their way. Margaret's face turned white as a ghost. He's lying, she shrieked. But residents were already surrounding her, phones recording. You tried to cut the power yourself to blame me? I asked, shocked at how far she'd gone. The doors burst open as police officers entered with flashlights. Jeffrey tried sneaking out the back but ran straight into Officer Reynolds. The local news vans pulled up outside. Elena had called them earlier, just in case. 2 weeks later, I watched Margaret and Jeffrey on TV, being charged with forgery, trespassing, and attempted vandalism. My farm was now famous locally as the HOA Battlers Victory Garden. The new HOA president, Thomas, met me at my fence line. We voted to help rebuild your damaged crops. Maybe we could work together instead of against each other? I smiled, shaking his hand. I'd like that. Sometimes good neighbors just need good fences and clear boundaries.